Chapter 28, Dart. An entire week had passed, and much had changed. Saberclaw, Razorwing, and Silverspot trained in multiple fields to sharpen their skills for the battle to come. Lockjaw had also made a recovery. He had a few permanent scars, but other than that he was completely battle-ready. He also trained with the others and learned more than he thought he would, especially about his teammates. He learned the extent of Razorwing's invisibility abilities, and he learned just how powerful Saberclaw was now that she had discovered her telekinesis. He also realized that Silverspot was not just an experienced and slightly grumpy medic, but she was a great fighter as well. Her crossbow had deadly accuracy, and she was stronger than she looked. Currently, Lila and her two family members were out looking for ways to communicate with the army, so the robots were home alone. All four of them were doing activities inside the training room. Razorwing and Lockjaw were brawling in an indoor area, and Silverspot was teaching Saberclaw some basic first-aid maneuvers. Silverspot picked up a metal sheet. This piece of metal can save a life, Saberclaw. Remember that. Honestly, any piece of metal can as long as it can be bent. See? She gestured to Saberclaw as she bent the thin metal sheet. This took a bit of effort, but Silverspot managed. Saberclaw stared intently at the now slightly flexible sheet of metal. Silverspot held out her metal arm and demonstrated on herself as she explained, "Just gently wrap it around the injured area, and the G should stop leaking. However, make sure that you are gentle, the metal is tightly bound, and that the piece of metal is flexible enough. You will be surprised by how many lives I have saved with this trick." Although she put her fingers on her face and thought, most of those times was saving Ironstripe's life. She chuckled a little at the incredible number of times that Ironstripe was bleeding to death on her medical table in the past. Saberclaw looked at her with pity and spoke softly. "Hey, are you okay? I know you and Ironstripe were really close." Silverspot smiled gently and remembered times when Ironstripe would joke with her about his injuries that she patched up. "I'm all right, Saber. Now, I just treat him like a recently learned lesson. He serves as a constant reminder to me to never let anyone corrupt my ideals. Besides, that is one of the most important things you should remember after this is all over, Saberclaw. Always remember who you are, no matter what battles you have been through." Silverspot seemed grave, but she quickly smiled and continued fidgeting through her medical tools. The memory of Ironstripe was bittersweet to Silverspot. It was disappointing and discouraging that Ironstripe betrayed his morals and his team, but if he had the heart to do such a thing, maybe he was never good for Silverspot or anyone else in the first place. Also, she had loved him for so long, and the pair had quite a few happy memories together. She felt a hole inside her, but Silverspot refused to let the loss of a disloyal partner affect her performance and overall mood. Saberclaw admired Silverspot's amount of self-control and her hold on her emotions. She didn't let such a catastrophic betrayal tear her down, and this made Saberclaw confident that Silverspot was a robot to be trusted. Saberclaw smiled and said, "I'm kind of jealous that you were so unaffected by Ironstripe since you two were partners. If Lockjaw did something like that, I would be devastated." She watched Silverspot closely and saw the silver robot's face continue with a gentle expression. "Yes, well, such abilities come with age, young one. If I was only a year or two old, I would be devastated as well." She smiled widely, and the two of them laughed. Silverspot had hinted that she was old, but in truth, Silverspot and Ironstripe were only roughly 14 years older than the other three. However, Silverspot had shown more maturity than the three of them combined, so that must count for something. Meanwhile, Razorwing and Lockjaw were fake fighting across the room. However, their fight seemed a little too personal to be entirely fake. Razorwing swung a punch at Lockjaw's face, but he dodged it easily. "Hey, that seemed rather spirited, Razorwing." Lockjaw complained about Razorwing's attacks, saying that they were suspiciously focused. Razorwing rolled his eyes and responded out of frustration. "What am I supposed to do, not try? You wouldn't improve if I went easy on you, Lockjaw." He swung again but missed. Lockjaw struggled to keep himself balanced while under the constant attacks of Razorwing. Lockjaw decided to test the waters. "Why do you look so much like me, anyway?" I'm sorry, but I've been wondering for a while now. He kicked at Razorwing's chest, but the red robot caught his boot and threw Lockjaw off balance with great force. Razorwing tilted his head with an offended expression as he let Lockjaw recover. Oh, that's the first question you ask of all questions. Cool. Anyway, John copied Sam's designs for you and made me, just with a few twists that made my design better. An example, invisibility. He turned invisible, and Lockjaw looked around for him. Lockjaw thought to himself about how Razorwing was very talented with setting boundaries and still offending him. Lockjaw's face scrunched in frustration as he called, "How am I supposed to fight someone I can't see? Reveal yourself, you coward." He insulted Razorwing with sarcasm, making it a subtle jab, disguised as a joke. Razorwing, still invisible, hit Lockjaw from behind and answered, "You never know, the next Hari could have invisibility. Besides, I get more pleasure out of training this way." He hit Lockjaw from behind again, and the blue robot slammed his wings together, trapping Razorwing while he was still invisible. Lockjaw had a small, permanent scar between his wings, but he could now move them just as well as before. Razorwing revealed himself and yelled, "Let me go!" He struggled and eventually escaped from Lockjaw's hold. He felt embarrassed, but then realized that Saberclaw wasn't watching and felt better about it. Lockjaw shot back, "You never know, the next Hari could be twice as strong as you. You should train more." Lockjaw smirked and grabbed Razorwing, flinging him to the side. Razorwing stabled himself again and glared at Lockjaw. Well played. He lunged at Lockjaw with his hand drawn back, ready to strike. Lockjaw moved his head to the side a little and grabbed Razorwing's wrist. However, Lockjaw didn't pause or stop moving. He used Razorwing's momentum to launch the red robot over his shoulder. Lockjaw slammed Razorwing on the ground, and his wings flattened from the force. Razorwing grunted and tried to recover, but struggled. Lockjaw pressed his foot up against Razorwing's shoulder and pulled the limp arm toward him. Razorwing cried out in pain, but Lockjaw's face remained determined. Lockjaw continued pulling, but warned, "Tap out, Razorwing." Razorwing understood that if he tapped out, then Lockjaw would stop hurting him, but the red robot's ego was too big and sensitive to give up. Razorwing rolled over and used the arm that was being used against him to his advantage. He reached forward a little, causing a pain that was worth it, and gripped Lockjaw's hand. Lockjaw's face faltered as Razorwing twisted himself upright again. Razorwing pulled Lockjaw forward, knocking him off balance and making him fall forward. Razorwing used Lockjaw's weight to get on his feet again, and he launched himself at Lockjaw. Lockjaw was knocked over, and he fell to the ground. Razorwing turned invisible and watched Lockjaw whip around, looking for him. Razorwing, still invisible, grabbed Lockjaw's arm and twisted it under his wings. Lockjaw yelped as Razorwing commented with arrogance, "How does it feel? Tap out, Lockjaw." He smirked as Lockjaw struggled against his grip. Every time Lockjaw got close to escaping, Razorwing would twist Lockjaw's arm a little more, causing intense pain. Now Lockjaw had pinpointed where Razorwing was, and he blindly swung his fist behind him. His metal hand struck Razorwing in the jaw, and the robot instinctively came out of hiding. His red paint reflected the white lights above the two as he stumbled backwards. This fight that was meant for training purposes now felt too personal. Razorwing gritted his teeth, and the two robots lunged at each other again. Before they could hit each other, both of their bodies froze in place and were unable to move. Lockjaw groaned, knowing what was happening as he rolled his eyes. Razorwing struggled and yelled, "Saberclaw, let me go. Actually, let him go too, so it's a fair fight." He continued complaining as Saberclaw stepped onto the scene with her metal fingers stretched forward. Saberclaw was standing between the two now, and Silver Spot was walking up behind her. Saberclaw had heard the sounds of their struggle and noticed the suspiciously spirited attacks they were inflicting upon each other. She had come over and forced them to stop fighting with her telekinesis. "There, now neither of you have won the fight. Geez, your egos are the size of small continents." Saberclaw laughed. She released them, and they glared at each other. Neither of them dared to attack the other in front of Saberclaw and risk getting yelled at. Silver Spot chuckled, "Do you see? These two are surely troublemakers." She smirked at the two robots, and they glared at her in return and said nothing. Saberclaw sighed and put her hands on her hips. "I need to separate you two. Do you want to come on patrol with me?" she offered. Saberclaw had to step back, and her eyes widened a little with surprise when she got a response. Both of them had yelled, "I do," and took large steps toward her. Saberclaw smiled nervously and put her hands in front of her, as if she was blocking Razorwing and Lockjaw. Silver Spot clutched her torso and laughed. "Wow, you are very popular, Saberclaw." Silver Spot's wings spread a little with amusement as she continued. "Razorwing, stay here. I haven't given you first aid lessons yet. Lockjaw, you go with Saberclaw and try to be discreet, will you? Last time, you nearly alerted the whole town with your noise." Silver Spot commanded Razorwing, and he stepped beside her, still glaring at Lockjaw. Lockjaw glared as well, but his face was victorious because he knew this was a win over Razorwing, and he genuinely wanted to spend more time with Saberclaw. Saberclaw smiled and spun on her heels, walking out of the room as she adjusted her daggers and flicked her wings. Lockjaw realized late that Saberclaw was no longer beside him and had to bound after her. Silver Spot shook her head and walked with Razorwing over to her little box of tools. Razorwing sighed and felt his mood instantly become more negative. Silver Spot began lecturing him about one of her tweezer-like tools, and he quickly zoned out. Meanwhile, Saberclaw was practically marching through the hallway, with Lockjaw trailing right behind her. She was smiling as she thought about another patrol. It would be just her and Lockjaw walking around together, looking for enemies. Saberclaw felt appreciative to Silver Spot as well. If it wasn't for her, Saberclaw would have had to choose between Razorwing and Lockjaw, and she knew that would have caused another upheaval. Lockjaw fully caught up to her and slowed by her side. "Well?" he asked, wanting to start conversation. They exited the hangar and walked into the woods. The humans hadn't returned yet, and Saberclaw was beginning to get worried. She pressed down the feeling and chose to answer Lockjaw. "Well, what?" she asked. Lockjaw shrugged because he didn't really know what would be a good conversation starter. "What do you think of all of this? Our situation, I mean." He prompted and expected her to start talking about something so he could just listen to her voice, but she didn't say what he expected. "I'm not sure how I'm supposed to answer that, but I think our team is doing well as of right now. I hope the three humans get back okay, though." She quieted her steps and tucked her wings behind her back as she wove through the trees. They walked for a few minutes and now came upon a road. Cars thundered over the asphalt, and Saberclaw ducked into a kneeling position. She watched the road and observed the trees behind it carefully. Then a thought rose to her mind. She had always wondered why Lockjaw couldn't get along with Razorwing, but couldn't find a good time to ask about it until now. Saberclaw turned to Lockjaw, who was now crouching beside her, and she looked into his blue, metal irises. They shone brightly against his dark eyes and seemed to light up the dark forest alongside the green beams coming from her own face. She asked, "What is it between you and Razorwing? You two are almost always fighting." She felt a little nervous asking because she knew it was probably personal, but the question had been nagging at her for a while. Lockjaw turned to her, and his face moved a lot as he spoke, suggesting his strong feelings. "Yeah, I wondered that myself. I think he's jealous of me, or he doesn't trust me, maybe a little of both. I promised that I wasn't on Rebaya's side anymore, but he doesn't seem to believe me," he exclaimed, but was shushed by Saberclaw. She smiled at his childish gestures and scolded him in a low voice. "Be quiet, you. Anyway, I don't think he doesn't trust you." She tried to be encouraging, but Lockjaw was having none of it. He shook his head and spoke quietly. "That's what I thought too, until he started acting different towards me compared to everyone else. He especially does it when you aren't looking." He looked at the ground with a little discouragement. He felt like he was getting too vulnerable with Saberclaw and was acting immature, but he didn't let it show on his face. Saberclaw sighed and looked back at the road. "Come on, Lockjaw. Don't act like you don't fight him as well. I asked what the problem with both of you was, not just him. I feel like your actions aren't just defense, Lockjaw." She stood up, because she felt that this area was diligently checked. Saberclaw began walking away, and Lockjaw followed her. What do you mean? It is just defense. He was starting to get a little offended now, but chose to ignore it. Saberclaw didn't turn to face him, but she responded, Lockjaw, I think you're jealous, too. He is your teammate, and you two need to get along, because we have limited Sentiron warriors, and you can't avoid him. She was also starting to get frustrated with this conversation, because Lockjaw was dancing around the answer to her original question. Lockjaw's eyes hardened a little, and he tilted his head in confusion. Jealous? Me? Why would I be jealous of that rip-off Sentiron? He was beginning to get angry because of her nagging and accusations. Saberclaw stopped walking now and turned around. Yes, I was going to ask you that same question. You have no reason to be jealous of him. Lockjaw. He has nothing you should envy because you two are on the same side. Her tone was sharp now as she stared at him. They held eye contact, and Saberclaw could see the annoyance in Lockjaw's eyes. He moved closer to her, almost touching her. He looked down into her eyes and flared his wings. Really? Then why do you look at him certain ways, and why does he speak to you with certain tones? Does he really have nothing that I should envy? He asked. His body language was dangerous now, and Saberclaw stepped back. Lockjaw, come on. I don't know what you're talking about. Razorwing and I are teammates and friends at the most. Also, it probably isn't a good thing for you to be calling him a ripoff. She scolded him a little, and this seemed to provoke him more. He moved closer, forcing her to move backward again as he dropped his voice to a lower tone. But that's what he is. Besides, it probably isn't a good thing for you to be questioning me about such things. He was clearly angry now. Saberclaw saw this, but refused to back down. Lockjaw, if you did something to make Razorwing hate you, then you better apologize. She tried to make herself look bigger, but his face just scrunched with anger. He forced her to walk backwards so they wouldn't collide, and she backed into a tree. Saberclaw, I will not apologize to him for his own disrespect. And I said to stop asking me about this. His eyes were like knives cutting into her, and she couldn't help but feel fear as he towered over her. Her back was tightly pressed against the large tree, and she couldn't back away from him. However, Saberclaw knew he wouldn't hurt her, and she made the decision to continue. Just leave Razorwing alone, and he will leave you alone, Lockjaw. She glared at him, and he pressed his metal lips together. He snapped and thrusted his hand toward her. She closed her eyes and moved her head to the side a little. Then, she opened her eyes when she heard the crack of wood splitting beside her head. She saw Lockjaw had not tried to hit her, but simply slammed his hand into the tree beside her head. The blue armor on his arm blocked Saberclaw from moving away. He stared at her, his face relaxing a little as he realized he had made his point. I will repeat myself one more time, Saberclaw. Stop asking me about this topic. If you can't tell, it makes me uncomfortable. He removed his hand from the tree and used it to raise Saberclaw's head up by her chin. His eyes softened as he spoke. I'm sorry. I'm just used to violence always being the answer. Rebay wasn't exactly the best role model. He apologized and backed away from her, giving her space, but not too much space. Saberclaw still had her hands and back tightly pressed on the tree trunk with nervousness. She looked at the ground as soon as Lockjaw released her. Lockjaw gently removed her hands from the trunk and massaged her fingers as he looked into her eyes. Listen, darling, I really regret what I did just now, and I promise I won't do it again. Please answer me. He lowered his head and met her eyes as she continued staring at the ground silently. Lockjaw's face fell, and he whispered, Saberclaw. He wasn't used to the silent treatment and was getting a little scared. Then he saw Saberclaw's expression. She didn't look fearful anymore. Her stare was just blank. Her facial expression made fear strike Lockjaw like a truck. He was suspicious now, but he wasn't sure if she was trying to get back at him or not. Then Saberclaw's hands went limp, and he felt her fall forward into his arms. Lockjaw caught her, wrapping his arms around her torso and supporting her body. His hands traced the armor on her back, and he felt something unusual. He looked down at her back and saw something that made his mind jump to bad places. There, on the left side of her back, was a dart sticking out from between the metal plates of green-painted armor.